The airport terminal buzzed with its usual chaotic energy. People rushed in every direction, the sound of rolling suitcases and flight announcements mixing together into a steady hum. She moved through it all with a calm focus. As the founder and CEO of a company that helped big businesses become more sustainable, she was used to traveling. This trip was important, a series of meetings with potential investors. Her chief of staff walked beside her, a trusted right hand who handled the details so she could focus on the big picture. They reached the gate just as the first boarding call echoed through the space. "Now boarding our first-class passengers," the agent's voice came over the speaker. She nodded to her colleague, and they stepped into the priority lane. A few other passengers were already there, most of them dressed in business attire. She pulled up her digital boarding pass on her phone. The screen clearly showed her seat, 1A. She had booked it herself. It wasn't about luxury. It was about using the quiet time in the air to prepare, to think, to work without interruption. She handed her phone to the gate agent, a man with a tired look in his eyes. He scanned it, and his expression changed. A small frown appeared on his face. He looked from the phone to her, and then back to the screen. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said, not really looking at her. "There's been an adjustment here with the seating. Your seat has been reassigned." She felt a flicker of confusion. "Reassigned? That can't be right. This is my confirmed seat." The agent, whose name tag read Gary, shook his head slowly. "The system shows a change. I need you to step aside for a moment so we can assist the other passengers." Feeling the eyes of the people behind her, she took a small step to the side. Her chief of staff stayed close. They watched as the agent waved the next passenger forward, a man in a suit. He scanned his pass. "Welcome aboard, sir." "You're in 1A, the agent said, his voice noticeably smoother. That's when she understood. It wasn't a computer error. It wasn't about weight distribution or a broken seat. It was about her. The agent had looked at her, a black woman in a stylish but simple travel outfit, and made a quick, silent calculation. He had decided she did not belong in the first-class cabin. He had given her seat away. A heat rose in her chest, a mix of anger and a deep, familiar disappointment. She had felt this before, in boardrooms where people assumed she was an assistant, in restaurants where her credit card was scrutinized a little too long. But it never got easier. Her chief of staff stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "This is unacceptable. She paid for that seat. You just gave it to someone else. We need to speak to a supervisor." The agent, Gary, folded his arms. His tone became rigid, official. "Sir, I've explained the situation. The aircraft has a weight and balance issue. We've had to move some passengers. The only seats I have left are in the main cabin. You can take them, or you can discuss it with customer service after we depart. But the flight is closing." He was hiding behind fake policy, using words that sounded technical to shut down the argument. The message was clear. He had the power, and he was not going to bend. She saw the stubborn set of his jaw. Arguing here, in front of a growing line of impatient travelers, would only turn her into a spectacle. It would feed into the very stereotype he probably already believed, the angry black woman causing a scene. She took a slow, quiet breath. The initial wave of anger cooled into something else, a sharp, clear determination. She placed a gentle hand on her colleague's arm. "It's okay," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "We'll take the other seats." Her chief of staff looked at her, surprised and a little frustrated. But he trusted her. He knew that calm tone. It wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Gary looked almost smug, as if he had won. He printed out 2 new boarding passes with a final thump of the printer. "Here you go. 2 seats in row 23, B and E." They were middle seats, separated by the aisle dot, She took the flimsy paper passes without a word. She gathered her carry-on bag and turned away from the first-class lane. As she walked toward the main boarding door, she could feel the glances from other passengers, some curious, some pitying, some completely unaware of the small injustice that had just happened. They found row 23 deep in the plane. The space was tight. People were already stuffing bags into overhead bins, squeezing into their seats. She slid into the middle seat, 23B, and placed her bag under the seat in front of her. A man already sat by the window, headphones on. Another passenger took the aisle seat beside her colleague. She fastened her seatbelt with a click. Outside the small window, she could see baggage carts zipping by. The plane was full of the sounds of settling in-chatting, laughter, the beep of seatbelt signs. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Anyone looking at her would see a professional woman, maybe a little tired, waiting patiently for takeoff. But inside, her mind was not quiet. It was moving fast, turning over facts and options. She thought about the agent's dismissive eyes. She thought about the man now sitting in her seat, 1A, probably unaware of the swap. This wasn't just about a comfortable chair. It was about respect. It was about a company that allowed its employees to treat people this way. And she knew with a cold certainty that she was not going to let it stand. The phone rang once, a soft electronic purr in her ear that felt absurdly loud in the quiet of her own mind. She watched out the window as the terminal building began to slide slowly past, the plane crawling like a great metal insect away from the gate. A second ring. She wondered if he would even answer an unknown number. He was a busy man, after all. On the third ring, a voice answered. It was calm, slightly cautious. "This is Martin." "Martin," she said, her voice low and even. She kept her eyes on the world, moving past the window, focusing on a luggage cart to steady herself. "It's Alana Vance." She used her full name, the one on her company's charter, the one he would know. There was a brief pause on the other end, not of confusion, but of rapid mental recalibration. "Alana," the voice came back, warmer now, tinged with professional curiosity. "This is a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure?" She didn't waste a word. There was no room for small talk. "I'm currently sitting in seat 23 bytes on your flight 422, headed to Chicago. Approximately 10 minutes ago, at the gate, your agent removed me from my paid and confirmed first-class seat, 1A. He gave it to another passenger. His stated reason was a weight distribution issue, but the only passengers moved were myself and my colleague. We were offered only middle seats in coach." She delivered the facts cleanly, like bullets. Date, time, flight number, seat numbers, the agent's excuse. She did not say the words, "because I am a black woman." She didn't have to. A man like Martin Forrester, who had sat across from her in negotiations, would hear it in the spaces between her sentences. The line was silent for a beat longer this time. She could almost hear the gears turning, the swift, horrified understanding dawning. This wasn't a customer service complaint from a frequent flyer. This was a direct report from a peer, a CEO of a respected firm, alleging a profound operational and ethical failure at the most basic level of his company's service. "Alana, I don't know what to say," he finally responded, and the polished boardroom tone was gone, replaced by genuine shock. "That is completely unacceptable. It is not our policy. It is the opposite of our policy." "I understand it is not your written policy, Martin," she said, her tone shifting from reporting to analysis. It was the tone she used in board meetings when pointing out a systemic flaw. "But it is your de facto policy if it is allowed to be executed by your frontline staff without consequence." The agent was utterly confident in his decision. That confidence comes from a culture, not a one-time mistake. She let that sit. The plane was picking up speed now, turning onto a long taxiway, lining up with others for takeoff. The flight attendant was walking down the aisle, checking tray tables. "Where are you now?" Martin asked, his voice urgent. "We are taxiing." "The doors are closed." The agent made it very clear our choice was to accept these seats or be left behind. "Give me 60 seconds. Do not hang up." She heard a muffled sound as he presumably put his hand over the phone. She heard distant, sharp voices, though not the words. She held the phone, watching the wing of the plane flex slightly as it navigated a turn. Her colleague from the aisle seat glanced over, his face a question. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "It's handled." Martin's voice came back on, clearer, charged with a new intensity. "The flight is turning around. It is returning to the gate. Do not be alarmed when it happens." Almost as soon as he said it, the steady forward motion of the plane slowed. Then it stopped. The pilot's voice, calm and professional, filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the delay. We've been asked to return to the gate due to a technical paperwork issue that requires resolution before departure. We should only be a few minutes. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." A collective groan rippled through the cabin. People sighed, shifted in their seats, pulled out their phones again. She just listened, the phone still pressed to her ear. "Thank you, Martin," she said, and she meant it. His immediate action proved he understood the severity. "Do not thank me," he replied, his voice thick with something that sounded like embarrassment. "You should never have been in that position on one of my aircraft. Ever. I am so sorry, Alana, personally and professionally." The plane was backing up now, the whine of the engines changing pitch. It retraced its path, the same terminal windows sliding by in reverse. "The station manager and the captain will meet you at the gate," Martin continued. "Your original seats will, of course, be restored. But that is the absolute bare minimum. I would like to speak to the agent myself." "That's your employee to manage," she said, her gaze falling on a worker directing the plane with orange wands. "My concern is the environment that created him. My firm consults on sustainable, equitable systems. What I experienced today is a toxic element in your corporate ecosystem. It damages your brand, your employee morale, and your bottom line. It is a vulnerability." She was no longer a passenger wronged. She was a CEO, addressing a business problem for a fellow CEO. She was offering him the framework. Not just to fix this, but to fix his company. The plane bumped gently against the jet bridge and came to a final stop. The familiar ding echoed through the cabin. The head flight attendant was already moving quickly toward row 23. Her professional smile looking strained. The phone call wasn't over, but the first part of her mission was. She had stopped the plane, literally and figuratively. Now the real work would begin. The ding of the seatbelt sign turning off was the only sound in her row. All around them, the cabin was filled with a low rumble of confusion. People were muttering, looking out the windows at the stationary jet bridge, asking each other what paperwork issue could possibly be important enough to turn a whole plane around. The flight attendant arrived at row 23. Her smile was tight, professional, but her eyes were wide with a nervous energy she couldn't quite hide. She leaned in close, speaking in a hushed, urgent voice meant only for them. "Ma'am, sir, I need you to gather your personal items immediately. We need to deplane you." The man in the window seat next to her, who had been lost in his music, pulled off his headphones. "What's happening?" he asked, looking from the flight attendant to her. "It's a procedural matter, sir." "Just for these 2 passengers," the flight attendant said, her voice straining to stay calm. She was looking directly at her, the CEO, with a mix of respect and sheer panic. She simply nodded. She unbuckled her seatbelt, reached down for her bag, and stood up. Her movements were smooth, unhurried. There was no rush of victory, no smug look. Her face was a mask of quiet composure. Her colleague followed her lead, standing and pulling his briefcase from under the aisle seat. Every eye in the immediate rows was on them. She could feel the weight of their stares: curiosity, annoyance, suspicion. Who were these people? Why were they being taken off the plane? Was this about security? A whisper started to spread, moving faster than they could walk. She kept her gaze forward, following the flight attendant, who was now clearing a path. "Excuse us, please. Just need to step by." "Thank you for your patience," the flight attendant said to the passengers still standing in the aisle. Trying to get bags down. The walk from the back of the plane to the front door felt incredibly long. It was a walk of shame that was not hers to own. She held her head up. She was not a troublemaker being removed. She was a principal, walking out. As they neared the front, the captain himself emerged from the cockpit. He was an older man with a neat gray mustache, his uniform crisp. His face was serious, and he gave her a small, respectful nod as she approached. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, "on behalf of the airline, my deepest apologies for this situation. If you'll follow me." They stepped off the plane and into the quiet, carpeted tunnel of the jet bridge. The door hissed shut behind them, sealing off the noise of the cabin. For a moment, it was just the three of them, the captain, her, and her chief of staff. The sound of their footsteps on the rubber matting was the only sound. The captain stopped and turned to her. "The chairman is on the phone with station leadership. They are waiting for you at the gate. I am truly sorry you experienced this on my aircraft." He seemed like a decent man, embarrassed by the actions of his company. "It's not your fault, Captain," she said, and she meant it. "You have a job to do. Thank you for your professionalism." He nodded again, grateful for her understanding, and then gestured for them to continue ahead of him. The gate area was a surreal scene. The usual chaotic boarding energy was gone, replaced by a tense, frozen silence. Dozens of passengers waiting for other flights were staring openly. Their gate was empty, except for three men. There was the gate agent, Gary. His face was pale, wiped clean of its earlier smugness. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict. Beside him stood a middle-aged man in a shirt and tie, his forehead shiny with sweat, the station manager. And next to him, another man in a more expensive suit held a mobile phone out in front of him. On speaker mode. The voice coming from the phone was clear, authoritative, and filled with a cold anger. It was Martin, the chairman. "An utter failure of our standards. And I want a full report on how this was allowed to happen," the voice was saying as they approached. The station manager jumped into action. He stepped forward, hands slightly raised as if to calm a wild animal. "Miss Vance, on behalf of everyone here, I cannot apologize enough. This is not who we are." She stopped a few feet away, setting her bag down calmly. She looked at the agent, Gary. He couldn't meet her eyes. He stared at his shoes. The voice from the phone cut through the manager's apologies. "Alana, are you there?" "I'm here, Martin," she said, addressing the phone on the table. "What you described is appalling. The agent involved is being suspended immediately, pending a full investigation. Your original seats, 1A and 1C, are of course restored. We will be reboarding all passengers shortly, and we will be compensating everyone on that flight for this severe disruption." She listened. He was saying all the right things. Suspension, investigation, compensation. It was the standard corporate playbook for a major error. It was designed to close the issue, to contain the damage. She waited a beat after he finished. The entire gate area was listening. The other passengers, the airline staff, even the workers at the next gate had slowed down to watch. "Martin," she began, her voice not loud, but clear and firm in the quiet space. "Thank you for your prompt action. But this isn't about one agent on one bad day." She turned her head slightly, letting her gaze sweep over the agent, the manager, the captain who had just joined them. "This is about the environment that gives an employee the confidence to look at a customer, make a snap judgment, and knowingly break protocol without fear." He didn't think he was doing anything wrong. In his mind, he was probably correcting a mistake someone who didn't look the part in his first-class cabin. She saw the agent flinch. The manager looked sick. "My firm," she continued, turning back to the phone, "we audit corporate cultures. We look for the cracks where bias and inefficiency hide, because those cracks always lead to bigger fractures. What happened today is a critical data point. It reveals a deep crack in your foundation." She wasn't yelling. She wasn't even raising her voice. But her words landed with the weight of stone. She was no longer just a passenger demanding a better seat. She was a consultant delivering a devastating diagnosis. The voice from the phone was quieter now. "What are you proposing, Alana?" "I am proposing that my team and I conduct a review. Not of this incident, but of your hiring, training, and accountability systems from the ground up, starting with your board's oversight. We'll have a proposal to you by next week." There was a long silence from the speakerphone. The station manager held his breath. Finally, the voice came back, heavy with resignation and respect. "I will convene an emergency board call tonight. We will expect your proposal. And Alana, again, my personal apologies." The call ended with a soft click. The silence at the gate was now absolute. The agent, Gary, was finally looking at her, his face a mix of fear and dawning realization. He had tried to put a businesswoman in her place, and in doing so, he had brought the entire scrutiny of the corporation down upon himself and his colleagues. She picked up her bag. She looked at the captain. "We're ready to reboard now," she said, as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. The silence that followed the click of the phone was thick and heavy. It seemed to swallow the usual airport noise. The station manager finally let out a breath he'd been holding, a soft, shaky sound. He looked at the CEO, then at the suspended agent, then back at her, his mind clearly racing to figure out what to do next. "Right," the manager said, clapping his hands together once, a weak attempt to take back control. Let's get you reboarded immediately. Captain, if you could." The captain, who had been a quiet observer, stepped forward. "Of course, Miss Vance, sir, if you'll follow me." His tone was one of pure respect. As if escorting a visiting dignitary, they walked back towards the jet bridge door, leaving the little scene at the gate behind. She didn't look back at the agent. Her focus was already shifting, moving from the confrontation to the next steps. As the captain keyed open the door, the muffled noise of the impatient cabin spilled out. The walk back down the jet bridge felt different this time. It was no longer a retreat. It was a return. The captain entered the plane first. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice boomed over the intercom, full of a forced cheer. "We've resolved that paperwork issue, and we'll be underway shortly. We'll be reboarding one of our valued passengers, and then we'll get you on your way. Again, our sincere apologies for the delay." She stepped through the door and into the cabin. Every single face turned towards her. There were no whispers now. It was a stunned, total quiet. They all remembered her. She was the woman from the middle seat in row 23, the one who had been quietly led off the plane. Now she was walking back on with the captain himself, her colleague just behind her. She moved up the aisle, her posture straight, her face calm. She didn't smile, but she didn't look angry either. She met the eyes of the passengers who looked at her, not with a challenge, but with a simple, quiet acknowledgement. A woman near the front gave her a small, encouraging nod. A man looked away, suddenly very interested in his phone. The first-class cabin was at the front. As she approached, she saw the man now sitting in her seat, Warna. He was the one who had boarded after her. He had a glass of orange juice on his tray table and was reading a newspaper. He looked up as she stopped beside his seat. A flight attendant rushed over, her face flushed. "Sir, I am so sorry. There has been a seating error. I need to relocate you to another excellent seat we have prepared. We'll assist you with your things immediately." The man blinked, confused. "An error? But I was assigned this seat." "It was a system mistake, sir." "A profound error," the flight attendant said, her voice insistent. She was already reaching for his juice glass. "Please, come with me. We have your new seat ready, and will ensure you are fully compensated for the inconvenience." The man, flustered but not wanting to make a scene, gathered his paper and his bag. He stood up, glancing at her as he stepped into the aisle. For a brief second, their eyes met. She saw a flicker of understanding in his face, a realization that maybe this wasn't just a computer glitch. He looked quickly away and followed the attendant to a seat a few rows back in business class. She waited until he had moved. Then she placed her bag in the overhead bin, exactly above seat 1A. She sat down. The leather seat was cool and spacious. She fastened her seatbelt. Her colleague sat across the aisle in 1C, giving her a look that was part relief, part amazement. He leaned over slightly. "I've never seen anything like that," he said quietly. "It's not over," she replied, just as quietly. "It's just beginning." The flight attendants moved through the cabin with a new, hyper-attentive energy. They offered her a pre-flight drink, a hot towel, their voices dripping with a deference that was almost uncomfortable. She accepted a bottle of water with a simple thank you. Outside, the station manager was now at the gate desk, making a new announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen of Flight 422, we are now ready for final boarding. We once again apologize for the significant delay. As a token of our apology, we will be emailing all passengers a travel voucher. We thank you for your patience." The remaining passengers from the gate streamed back onto the plane. They looked tired and irritated, but as they passed through first class, many of them looked at her. Their looks had changed. The annoyance wasn't directed at her anymore. It was a look of curiosity, of putting the pieces together. She was the paperwork issue. She was the reason they'd sat on the tarmac for 40 minutes. The doors closed with a final thud. This time, there was no turning back. The plane pushed away from the gate and began its journey to the runway. As it taxied, she opened her laptop. But she didn't start working on her presentations. Instead, she opened a fresh document. At the top, she typed, "Proposal, Systemic Cultural Audit, Global Airways." She began to type notes, her fingers flying over the keys. She listed the incident not as a complaint, but as a case study A, frontline bias and brand risk. She outlined the immediate failures, the agent's unilateral decision, the lack of supervisor oversight, the attempted cover-up with a false excuse. Then she went deeper. She wrote about hiring practices, about implicit bias training that was probably just a boring video people clicked through, about accountability measures that looked good on paper, but didn't reach the front lines. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted smoothly into the air. The city fell away below, a grid of tiny lights. Up here, above the clouds, everything looked clean and simple, but her mind was in the messy, complicated world below. She thought about the agent, Gary. His suspension wasn't a victory. It was a symptom of the larger disease. Firing him would solve nothing. The culture would just produce another Gary. The real work was changing the soil, not plucking one bad weed. She thought about the chairman, Martin. His embarrassment was real, but embarrassment fades. Real change requires structure, metrics, and relentless follow-up. Her proposal would not be cheap, and it would step on a lot of toes within his company. He would have to decide if his apology was just words, or if he was willing to back it up with real investment and discomfort. She glanced out the window at the endless dark and the first stars appearing. For the first time since she had handed her phone to the agent at the gate, she felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. Not because it was done, but because she had transformed the incident. It was no longer a personal insult to be stung by. It was now a professional project to be managed. And that was something she knew exactly how to do. The flight attendant approached gently. "Would you like anything for dinner, ma'am? We have several options." She looked up from her screen and offered a small, genuine smile. "Thank you. The chicken, please." She was hungry. It had been a long day, and there was still much work to do. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of quiet, intense work. The incident on the plane did not stay a secret. Passengers had taken videos, written tweets, shared the story. For a few days, it was a hot topic, a dramatic tale of a CEO who had a plane turned around. Some people cheered her. Some said she was a diva who had inconvenienced hundreds. The news outlets ran with headlines about power and privilege. She did not give a single interview. She let the story run its course because the real work was happening far from the spotlight. Her team got to work. They were experts in building sustainable systems, and that didn't just mean for the environment. A sustainable company, in their view, was also one that was equitable, fair, and resilient. What happened at the airport was a major sign of a system that was sick. They prepared a proposal that was not a punishment, but a prescription for health. They asked for access, not just to the corporate policy manuals, but to the people. They wanted to sit in on hiring panels for gate agents and flight attendants. They wanted to see the raw data from customer complaints, to look for patterns no one else had searched for. They wanted to interview frontline employees, anonymously, to hear what they really thought about their training and the pressures they felt. And they wanted to start at the very top, with a workshop for the board of directors themselves. The chairman, Martin, agreed to everything. His initial embarrassment had hardened into a steely resolve. The board had been furious, not at her, but at the colossal failure and the public relations nightmare. They knew a simple apology was a Band-Aid on a broken bone. The day of the first board workshop arrived. She walked into a sleek, quiet boardroom high above the city. The views were breathtaking. Around a long, polished table sat a group of mostly older men and a few women, all of them powerful, all of them waiting. The air was tense. This was not a normal meeting. She stood at the head of the table, but she did not open with a presentation. Instead, she asked a simple question. "Can anyone here tell me the exact moment the customer decides to never fly with your airline again?" The board members looked at each other, slightly confused. One offered, "After a lost bag?" Another said, "A terrible delay?" She nodded. "Those are big moments. But I'm talking about the small moment. The silent moment. The moment a person feels unseen, disrespected, or judged. That moment is a tiny leak. You don't hear it. You don't see it. But over time, it sinks the whole ship." She then told them a story. It was not her story from the airplane. Instead, she told them about a single mother traveling with a toddler on a tight budget, who was sighed at and eye-rolled by a flight attendant for having too much carry-on luggage. She told them about a young man in a hoodie, a brilliant software engineer, who was repeatedly asked if he was in the right line for first class. She told them about an elderly couple who didn't speak much English and were ignored when they asked for help finding a connecting gate. "These people may never file a formal complaint," she said, her voice filling the quiet room. "They will just quietly take their business and the business of everyone they know to your competitors. They will become a story told at dinner parties about the awful time with that airline. The agent who moved me from my seat wasn't trying to lose you money. He was following a feeling, a bias, that he didn't even know he had. And your culture had done nothing to correct that feeling. She saw some of them sit back, thinking. She saw a few nods. She was not attacking them. She was showing them a hidden crack in their financial foundation. Then she presented their plan. It was thorough and tough. It involved revamping training from a boring seminar into real conversations with role-playing. It involved a new, simpler system for employees to report problems without fear. It involved tying part of management's bonuses, not just to profits, but to employee and customer satisfaction scores from diverse groups. It was about building systems that made it harder to do the wrong thing and easier to do the right thing. The discussion that followed was long and serious. There were arguments about cost, about time, about the feelings of long-time managers. But the chairman, Martin, was firm. The cost of doing nothing, he said, echoing her words, is far greater. We are not just fixing a PR problem. We are fixing the company. A month later, the partnership was officially announced. It wasn't a splashy news item. It was a sober press release about a commitment to long-term cultural improvement. The viral story had died down, replaced by the next big thing. One afternoon, she was back at the same airport, heading to another meeting. She wore a simple blazer and slacks, and she walked with the same calm focus. As she approached the security line, an airline employee, a young woman at a kiosk, caught sight of her. The employee's eyes widened slightly in recognition. The young woman left her kiosk and walked over to her. She looked a little nervous, but she spoke clearly. "Excuse me, ma'am. You're her, aren't you? From the flight." She paused, not sure what to expect. "Yes." The young woman's face broke into a sincere smile. I wanted to say thank you. I work for the airline. They just rolled out the first part of the new training last week. For the first time, it felt like they were talking about real things that happened to us, to the passengers. It felt like they were actually listening. She lowered her voice. "A lot of us are really glad. Thank you." She felt a deep warmth spread through her chest. This was the moment that mattered. Not the headlines, not the boardroom. This. She smiled back, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. "It means more than you know." She continued on her way to her gate. Her flight was called, and she walked down the jet bridge. This time, when she handed her phone to the gate agent, a different person. In a different city, the agent scanned it, smiled, and said, "Welcome aboard. Miss Vance, your seat is 1A. She settled into the window seat. As the plane climbed above the clouds, she looked out at the vast, sunlit sky. The goal had never been to get a first-class seat. It had been to make sure that everyone, regardless of what they looked like, would be treated with the basic dignity the seat represented. The plane had been grounded that day not for revenge, but for repair. And now, the long, slow, necessary work of rebuilding something stronger and more fair was finally underway. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to rest for a moment, feeling the steady, powerful hum of the engines carrying them all forward.